it comes to NFL content here on YouTube, draft grades are far from a new concept. There's plenty of people out there who will talk about their favorite drafts or their least favorite drafts. People that have a channel dedicated to a specific team will focus on that team's draft. There's guys out there, like I did last year, who will talk about the draft in its entirety, but break it down into 8 videos going division by division. There's other people who will just make one video talking about the draft at large and be done with it. All of those are very valid and, quite frankly, correct ways of going about this whole draft content thing. However, because I wanted to be different, back in the month of May, I decided that I was going to do one video for every single NFL team. 32 videos throughout the months of May and June, talking about the draft and grading every single pick. Here we are at the end of August, and I still have 2 whole divisions left to do. So that didn't work out, and I found out very quickly why I had seen no one else do this. Now, that being said, I made a commitment. I owe it to both myself and to you, the viewer, to complete this, to go through with these last 8 teams, these last 2 divisions, and hand out my grades for the 2024 NFL Draft. Now, that being said, because we are in late August, preseason has ended, cut day is either rapidly approaching or in the past by the time you're watching these videos, and we've seen camp and, the development that these rookies are already undergoing. Just know that that's not really factoring into these grades. Now, there have been a couple exceptions here and there. I make sure to disclose when those are, but for the most part, these grades were grades that I wrote down in, early May and have stuck to. Now, that being said, if there's a grade that is already showing signs of aging poorly, then I will tell you, hey, this is how I felt about this player before the draft. However, it looks like he's already starting to prove me wrong. I will happily admit that, and we can all laugh at me taking forever and being a big, dumb, stupid idiot. Also with that, please try to keep in mind that I'm not trying to say that I am better or know better than any of the GMs that get mentioned in these videos. I'm just a 21-year-old college kid who spent what little free time he had during the spring, taking a look at film and scouting prospects and doing what I could to the best of my ability. And I like sharing my opinions on this kind of stuff. You guys seem to like it when I share my opinion on this kind of stuff, so I'm going to continue to do it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the Denver Broncos and what they did during the 2024 NFL Draft. The Denver Broncos are one of those teams where I simply do not envy the position they're in, and I don't mean in terms of what they have going on roster-wise or coaching-wise or anything like that. Because the more I think about it, the more I like this Broncos roster, and I love Sean Payton. He's one of the greatest offensive minds I've seen in my 21 years on this planet. But outside of the Broncos, the things out of their control, right? You've got Patrick Mahomes and his litany of stars on the Kansas City Chiefs looking to three-peat in your backyard, in your division. You've got the Raiders, who Antonio Pierce came in last year and showed a lot of promise. The team really seems to like him, really seems to buy into him. They're kind of scary, but then again, on the flip side, Gardner Minshew's their quarterback, so maybe they're not all that scary. And then you got the Chargers with Justin Herbert, who is a superstar quarterback in this league. They bring in Jim Harbaugh, who's fresh off a natty, one of the better head coaches I've seen in my lifetime. And then you have a litany of other star-studded teams in the AFC, all trying to keep you from winning a playoff game or even getting to the playoffs. Meanwhile, last year you had to sit through the terror that was the Russell Wilson trade. You're fresh off of that. He looked horrible. There's a reason he got cut. And now you're left with a roster that is supporting a rookie quarterback, and we'll talk about that quarterback here in a second. Whereas it feels like everyone else kind of has everything figured out, I guess apart from the Raiders, right? The Raiders, we still don't know what the hell's going on with them, but I digress. I think this is a team that in terms of their projection this year, I would say on paper, will probably finish 3rd in this division, but they could surprise me and end up beating out the Chargers. And one of the main reasons they could surprise me was their first pick in the draft this year being Bo Nix, the quarterback out of Oregon. And I want to make something clear right away. I did not love this year's quarterback class. I really liked Caleb. I really liked Drake May. And then after that, I was pretty lukewarm towards a couple quarterbacks. And then I really didn't like guys like Penix. Wasn't a huge Jaden Daniels guy. But Nix was my QB3. And him being my QB3, with all due respect to Nix, was really more of a testament to how I felt about the other quarterbacks in this class. Because Nix is a very inoffensive quarterback, right? Like, you look at the AFC right now, I mentioned Mahomes and Herbert. If Anthony Richardson hits the ceiling he's supposed to have, you have Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence. Even, I know people are pretty weird about him, but I think Lawrence is an incredible quarterback. Aaron Rodgers, if he comes back healthy. Josh Allen, obviously. There's a lot of really, really, really good quarterbacks in the AFC. One could argue that a lot of those guys are like super weapon quarterbacks. And with all due respect to Bo Nix, he's just not that player, right? He's not that type of guy. He's not as flashy. He's not as exciting. But what Bo Nix lacks in that true, like, game-breaking ability that a lot of those guys have, he makes up for by playing in structure nearly flawlessly. Which is so funny, because if you watched Bo Nix play football at Auburn, he was kind of a loose cannon, right? He was a lot more Baker Mayfield, a lot more Caleb Williams, a lot more Patrick Mahomes than he was this true pocket passer that he kind of settled into his last year at Oregon. And I'm really impressed by that transition. I say that Nix is a little bit limited compared to those other guys, but it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. Because the last quarterback you had was one of those guys who, once upon a time, was one of those super weapon quarterbacks, one of the OG kind of like real improviser, Superman guys, at least for my generation. And we saw that did not work with Sean Payton, because this is an offense heavily reliant on playing within structure and, just kind of taking what the defense gives you, playing smart, kind of letting the flow of the offense happen through the play call rather than what the quarterback's doing. And that's not me trying to say that Bo Nix is going to be some mediocre game manager or anything like that, but it's a lot less taxing when you have such a great play caller that can really take a lot of the pressure off of your quarterback. Now, obviously, as Nix grows and develops, that's kind of one of those things where the more you prove yourself in the offense, the more you're given, the more you're given to work with, the less your hand is held, so to speak. I don't like using that terminology because I don't want to make it seem like, Sean Payton is going to hold Bo Nix's hand right away. Because, the guy was running Oregon's offense his final year. He was calling plays. He was making adjustments on the fly. You don't see that a lot from college quarterbacks anymore. You don't see guys with the type of control and demand he had over Oregon's offense last year. So I think Nix is... I don't want to use the term NFL ready because there is such a negative connotation with that with quarterbacks. But he's not that, if that makes sense. Taking a look at my notes here for Nix, obviously very experienced. He's really good at making pre-snap adjustments, recognizing that maybe there's a speed mismatch on the outside with Troy Franklin, who we'll get to, and saying, hey, making an audible, making a change, and being able to capitalize on that mismatch. As I said, he's really good at working within structure. He's a game manager, but not in the derogatory way. I feel like the term game manager kind of gets a bad rap. I guess a better way to put it that's more socially acceptable, so to speak, is he's more like a point guard, right? You hear game manager, you're like, oh, Jimmy Garoppolo, not a good quarterback. You hear point guard, all of a sudden it's like, oh, Joe Burrow, Drew Brees, these guys that just execute at a high level. Am I saying Nix is going to be as good as them? No, but maybe. He's a rookie. There's sky's the limit, right? He's a really good ball handler who very rarely puts the ball in harm's way. Has a good, quick, fluid release that allows him to generate just enough velocity to put the ball where it needs to be. He has good arm elasticity that allows him to release the ball at different angles while maintaining that velocity. He's shown he's more than capable of throwing with touch. There's a lot of flashes of anticipation with him. He's able to navigate the pocket pretty well when faced with pressure. And then on top of that, he's got all these pocket passer aspects. Like I said, at Auburn, he was more of a loose cannon, so he still has that ability, when the play breaks down, to kind of take things into his own hands and make something happen. Or if he has to, he has some wheels. Now, he's not, Lamar Jackson, but if he has to, he can, tuck it and run for 7, 8, 10 yards pick up a first down if he has to. So I think there's a lot to like about Nix. Now, looking at some of the negatives, he is 24, which isn't ideal, but unlike, say, a Michael Penix, where he's 24 and you're expecting him to sit, he's 24 and he's the day one starter. That's a lot easier for me to stomach. That's a lot more understandable. Because at the end of the day, quarterbacks play until they're a lot older nowadays, barring some crazy injury, which knock on wood. So if you've got a guy, he's coming in day one at 24, then that's totally fine. Whereas with the Knicks, like in my Falcons video, I said the Knicks pick was the worst pick of the draft, and I stand by that. You're expecting him to sit 2, maybe 3 years, so he's not going to get his first start until he's 26, 27. That's when it starts to be like, why do that? Why not take a younger quarterback like a JJ McCarthy or wait, right? Whereas with Knicks, first of all, they didn't have the luxury of taking a JJ McCarthy. When I say the luxury, I mean like of a guy that's going to develop, because I do think McCarthy has a higher ceiling than Knicks, but that's neither here nor there. Knicks is the guy. That's what's important. But some of the other weaknesses here, 30% of his passing attempts in 2023 came behind the line of scrimmage. Not ideal. Obviously, you want to see him get the ball downfield more. I don't think that's a huge deal, but it's certainly worth noting. It's a common critique you're going to hear of Knicks. He doesn't quite have an elite arm. It's not a bad arm. It's much more like a Joe Burrow, where he can make a lot of the throws, but he's not Josh Allen. He's not Mahomes. He's not Anthony Richardson. He doesn't have this cannon that he's going to fire the ball 70, 80 yards downfield or anything like that. And because of that, he will overcompensate on deep shots, so his downfield accuracy is not great. Now, his accuracy at every other, space on the field is pretty good, but when you try to put that extra air behind throws, sometimes you will lose a little bit of the control. My big issue with Knicks is his lower body mechanics. I think those and his footwork need a good bit of work. Now, that being said, watching him in the preseason, I think they looked much improved. I still think he has a little bit of room to grow, but he's not nearly as chaotic as he was at times at Oregon, which is great. Additionally, another thing that goes with that footwork, he does tend to drift a little too deep in the pocket. You'd like to see that improved, and I think it did in the limited snaps we saw of him in the preseason. I thought he was a lot better with that. When it comes to handling pressure, I know I just said that I like the way he navigates the pocket, and I do, but I will say he feels that pressure and will short arm throws or like just desperately try to get rid of the ball. And that's fine in some situations, but there will be some misses where you're like, he wants that one back, that type of thing. So not the end of the world. He is somebody that plays with a little bit of hesitation as a passer. When it comes to like tight windows, he'll very clearly see a guy open or see an area where he can put the ball and just be a little hesitant. And that will result in guys not being open anymore or missing, an open read where he could have picked up a first down. He has to settle for a check down, throw the ball away, get sacked, whatever. He does have a little bit of a tendency to lock onto his first read, but I'm very confident Sean Payton can coach that out of him. And I would like to see him throw receivers open a little bit more. But again, these are all things that I feel like Sean Payton is the best guy to work with him with. I know there were some people that are kind of trying to throw Sean Payton under the bus as of late. I don't agree with that. I think he got a raw deal getting stuck with Russell Wilson. I think Bo Nix is the perfect type of quarterback to pair with him. I know we've been talking about Nix for like 10 minutes at this point, but it's important. This is the future of Denver's franchise, hopefully, right? No sure thing with a rookie quarterback, but I think Nix is a pretty safe player. Is he ever going to be a Mahomes or an Allen or a Herbert or whoever? Probably not. But is he capable of being like a Purdy? Sure. I think he can be, a fringe top 10 quarterback at his peak. But, you get the right stuff around him, get an elite defense, which we know Denver is more than capable of building. And it's, in fact, I would say it's pretty damn close to it right now, if not already. And also you get some of the offensive weapons around him, get a good coaching staff. You can win a ring with a guy that's a fringe top 10 player. So definitely a good pick here. Will say it was a little early for my taste, and I also don't think Bo Nix is like a home run quarterback, so that's why this is an A and not an A+. But I do think in terms of the quarterbacks that were available, this is the best fit. So can't go wrong there at the end of the day. And then we jump into the third round, and they make a massive pickup. They end up taking Jonah Ellis, the edge, out of Utah. I was just talking about, if you want to win a ring with one of these fringe top 10 guys, you got to have a good defense. And Jonah Ellis is joining an already underrated edge room with guys like Baron Browning and Nick Benito and Jonathan Cooper, who, are not the biggest names in the world, maybe not the flashiest players, but I'll be damned if they don't get the job done. I got a lot of respect for Denver's edge room because it almost feels like, nowadays you want that true alpha number one edge rusher. And I don't know if Denver quite has that, but they've got a committee of guys that are really, really nice. Really, really nice. And I would say, honestly, maybe there's a world where Ellis can be that guy. Right? I don't know how likely it is, but I like Ellis a hell of a lot. I watched 20 edge rushers this year. He ended up as edge 6 for me, had an early to a mid-second round grade on him. You get him here in the third round at pick 76. That's awesome value based on my board. Obviously, this is a guy who is no stranger to the NFL. His father spent 10 years in the league, and he's had 3 brothers make it to the league. So that's pretty awesome. A second-generation player, the 5th out of the Ellis family to make their way to the NFL, is a great first step and really long arms that allow him to, come up with a formidable bull rush. He's a very nice bull rusher. He's got adequate bend and quick feet to quickly slip off blocks. He's got great hand usage as a pass rusher, and he's able to utilize swipes to keep himself clean and keep hands off of him. He's a noticeably deep bag of moves, a lot of moves in his arsenal. He's really strong at the point of attack. He's able to deliver accurate strikes and toss blockers with his strong hands. He's pretty good at attacking the inside shoulder of tackles and utilizing that to gain leverage. He's a very physical run defender who can hold his own despite his size. He's also one of those guys that has a red hot motor. He's out there running around like the Energizer Bunny, never takes a play off, never lets a play die, goes through the whistle. Just a high effort guy you love to see. He's still young, just turned 21 at the start of April. Someone that I think is polished as is, but still has a little bit of room to grow, can grow and develop with these other guys in this edge room. And taking a look at some of the weaknesses, he does have tight hips that are going to limit his ability to move laterally. His anchor is better than one would expect, but it's still not fantastic. His power profile, while impressive, is not fantastic. That's mainly due to the fact that he is only 6'2", 248 pounds, but I think for what he is, being a 3-4 outside linebacker, edge rusher, he's about where you'd want him to be. He can be overwhelmed by more powerful blockers, so some of these big hulking guys, they get their hands on him, he will get contested, get trapped up. And then the big thing, the injuries. He had a major injury in 2022 and 2023, including tearing his labrum late last year, which turned a lot of people off of his tape. They were watching him play hurt, weren't super impressed by him. I got to disagree. I think he was an awesome player. If you go back a year and watch him before he got hurt, he was putting on incredible tape at Utah. Reminds me a lot of Alex Highsmith, one of those guys who's been a number 2 his whole career, but one could argue if he did leave Pittsburgh, he could be a number 1 somewhere else. Maybe Ellis can turn into that number 1 here in Denver, and if he doesn't, then so be it. You got a great committee of guys that, just kind of swap in and out, keep themselves fresh, keep offensive linemen on their toes. And in my opinion, if you've got 4 or 5 guys that are really solid like Denver has, then that's just as good as having a true alpha, right? Maybe not as good as having like a Myles Garrett, but as good as having like an Aiden Hutchinson. As we then move on to day 3, we get to Troy Franklin, the wide receiver out of Oregon, obviously Bo Nix's teammate. And I didn't love Troy Franklin. I had a 3rd round grade on him. You get him in the 4th. I think that's good value, and I like the idea of reuniting him with Nix. But, there were some people that were giving him round 1 hype. A lot of people were saying he was worth at least a 2nd rounder. I didn't see it. I thought there were 18 receivers in this class better than him. A couple guys who were still on the board, but I get it. You want to keep that chemistry together because the truth of the matter is a lot of what Troy Franklin did best revolved around his chemistry with Bo Nix, his ability to come back to the ball, make himself available on scramble drills, kind of having that unspoken communication, being able to adjust on the fly, things like that. They had a lot of big plays at Oregon doing that kind of stuff. So keeping that chemistry together is great. On top of that, he's got good long speed, which he pairs with solid ball tracking ability to make him a pretty formidable deep threat. He's got a refined release package with good foot speed and acceleration. He's able to quickly change directions without losing speed or momentum. He's capable of throttling up and down on command when attacking vertically. He understands zones and possesses great football awareness, making him more of a threat as the play goes on. Like I said, did a lot of work with Nix of just like sitting down in the soft spot of his zone, making himself open, making himself available. So if all else failed, Nix could just find where he was and he'd probably be open. He's great at towing the line with push-offs at the top of his route to create extra separation. I don't know how much of that he'll get away with at the next level because they're usually a lot more aggressive about calling that in the NFL. We'll have to see, but he was really good at getting away with some stuff that he probably shouldn't have. He works the sideline well with body control and a pretty solid catch radius for a smaller guy. He's a creative mover in space who can slip and squirm through tackles after the catch. And of course, his last year at Oregon, he was super productive. Him and Bo Nix kind of had that breakout year that coincided with each other. Now, that being said, not the most explosive guy in terms of that short area. You know, when he fires off the line and runs like a drag or a zig or whatever, not exactly the most explosive guy there. Additionally, he just doesn't look as fast in the short to intermediate areas of the field as he does downfield, so it just seems like he's more of a accelerator than a, truly fast player, which is fine. You're not drafting Troy Franklin to say, hey, we need you to run a dig 50 times a game, right? You're drafting him to say, hey, go run a go route, and Bo's going to find you. However, as a lankier player, being 176 pounds, that does hurt his ability to make contested catches and beat press on the outside. He struggles to maintain leverage and positioning on those 50-50 opportunities because of that. Drops weren't the biggest deal with him, but they were a bit of an issue with an 8.8% drop rate throughout his career. And of course, because he's skinny, he's not going to be much help in the run game, although he does try. You got to give credit where credit's due there. This is one of those things where I know Broncos fans are going to eat it up. I understand why. I think it's a good pick, but like I said, the big thing for me, I just wasn't a huge fan of Troy Franklin, and I thought there were better receivers still on the board. You look at guys like Javon Baker, Tez Walker, I really liked, a couple other guys. I'm not going to sit here and talk your ear off with names, but the point is, I understand why they made the pick. It makes sense. It's good value. He's a good enough player. He's going to serve a solid role, being that Z with Cortland Sutton and, guys like Josh Reynolds and Marvin Mims around him, and then Devon Vele, who we'll talk about. I think Denver's got a pretty solid receiver core, one that I like a lot more than I figured I would going into this. As we move on to the fifth round, they made two picks, the first of which was Chris Abrams-Draine, the corner out of Missouri. Not someone I watched pre-draft, unfortunately. But he's got good speed, good burst. He can close on the football pretty quickly to impact the ball at the catch point. He has the speed to carry receivers vertically downfield. He possesses the leaping ability and arm length to challenge jump balls. He's going to get his hands on receiver and press man to throw them off their route pretty consistently. He's able to fluidly transition from a back pedal to turn and run with receivers without losing a ton of speed. He's a willing tackler who's going to throw himself into ball carriers at full speed. His experience both inside and outside does a good job of playing through receivers' hands at the catch point. He used to play wide receiver, so he's really good at fighting for the ball and has good ball production because of that, or at least the upside for good ball production. He has the hands to secure interceptions, another thing to go with that. And he has kick return experience. He's somebody that played special teams, has the speed to be like a gunner or get downfield quickly. That being said, a skinny guy, 173 pounds, he's going to get overpowered at the catch point by bigger receivers because of that. His lack of size will lead to him getting run through as a tackler, but you got to respect the commitment. You got to respect the effort. He will allow receivers to stack him vertically downfield. Sometimes because guys will outmuscle him throughout the route, he will struggle maintaining proper positioning and staying in phase and coverage. And because of that size, he's somebody that might only be able to play out of the slot. Now, me personally, I think he would fit nicely on the outside. You look at Riley Moss being one of the starters right now. Personally, I think Abrams-Draine's a better corner. I'd rather see him starting, but, they're the experts. I'm not going to question the defensive staff that Denver has. And obviously with Jaquan McMillan, you're not exactly looking for a nickel corner. So I think Abrams-Draine is somebody that, you'd rather at least have in the rotation to play on the outside to start out. And, if you want to do some different things with McMillan, or if God forbid he gets hurt, again, knock on wood, he's somebody that, can slot in there. But I thought this was a solid pick. My only real critique with this was I did think there was a better corner on the board in Kalen Carson out of Wake Forest, but that's neither here nor there. Still a solid corner, good athlete, going to be good on special teams. This is another example where I definitely see the vision. It's just I wasn't quite as high on Chris Abrams-Draine as the Broncos seem to be, and I did think there was at least one guy who does a lot of the similar stuff just a little bit better. Although I will say Carson's not quite as athletic, so maybe that's what they were looking for there, and I'm being a total goober. But the grade is more to do with the positioning. I just don't think I would have taken Abrams-Draine here. But it is what it is, right? Still a good pick, still a solid player, still somebody that can contribute. As we go 2 picks later, they take Audric Estime, the running back out of Notre Dame. This pick I absolutely love. I love Estime mainly because I'm a sucker for a power back. I'm an old school football fan, man. I love me a power back. I just can't help it. You look at Estime as somebody who wasn't super fast, was just a straight bruiser, 5'11", 221 pounds, big dude. Reminds me a lot, I'm a Bears fan, reminds me a lot of Jordan Howard, in a good way. Like when Jordan Howard was really good in 2016 and pretty solid in 2017. That's the type of runner I see with Estime. And honestly, I'm saying Jordan Howard because he's not the fastest guy in the world. He still plays a lot faster than you'd think. You look at him and then you see the 40 time he ran, you'd think, he'd be one of those guys that, 20 years ago would have been told to play fullback. Not really the case. He's got deceptive speed. Now, he's not a burner, but, faster than you'd expect, right? He's got good, not great acceleration with good agility and change of direction for a back of his stature. The big thing about him, though, outside of that size, is the patience and the vision behind the line of scrimmage. I'm a sucker for a running back that just knows what's going on, has great vision. Estime is one of those guys. He's able to lower his shoulder and just absolutely obliterate defenders. Averaged 4.27 yards after contact in college. He forced 64 missed tackles last year, largely due in part to his ability to break arm tackles. Because once he gets going, he's like a freight train. You better hope you're bigger than him, or you can get him low once he gets going, because you're not arm tackling him. It's just not happening. He has great contact balance. He's really good at keeping his feet under him. He isn't afraid to hurdle defenders that try to go low on him, which is a sight to behold. He has relatively low tread on his tires. And on top of that, on top of being like a really good power back, he flashed the ability in college to be a sure-handed receiver, granted on limited targets. He was a pretty good pass protector. Didn't have a lot of whiffs, which is awesome. You love to see that. Now, that being said, again, not the greatest athlete in the world. Not somebody that's necessarily going to be a mismatch in the receiving game because of those limited athletic tools. But for a team that needs just somebody to say, fuck you, I'm going through you, I like Estime quite a bit. And there's more to his game than that. Like I said, he can be a pass catcher. He gives you something different. I really like this running back room the Broncos are building. Obviously, Sean Payton likes to have this like Mark Ingram type who's just a true thunderback. And that's kind of what Estime is. Long term, maybe Blake Watson can come up the UDFA and be some of that lightning. Right now, obviously, it's going to be Jaleel McLaughlin, who looked really, really good last year. I still have a lot of faith in Javonte Williams. Maybe a little bit of bias because I do have a soft spot for North Carolina. Not a huge college football fan outside of scouting, but I am a huge North Carolina basketball fan, so I got a soft spot for the Tar Heels. But either way, great pick with Estime here. And then in the 7th round, their first 2 picks, they took Devon Vele, the wide receiver out of Utah. And this is one that I've kind of had to come back to. Right, I didn't watch him pre-draft. But coming back to him, and really, I said at the start of this video, I tried to limit how often I changed grades based on like preseason or things that have happened after the draft. With Vele, cutting Tim Patrick makes this like an A+ pick, because that's what Vele is now. He's Tim Patrick. 6'4", 203 pounds, good speed, good athlete. That's kind of what he's coming in to be. Now, he's kind of a one-dimensional player, but, let's not act like Tim Patrick was some complete player either, right? A healthy Tim Patrick wasn't getting confused for Justin Jefferson. He was just, hey, I'm big and fast, throw ball my way downfield. That's what Vele is, right? 6'4", 33.5-inch arms, great catch radius, good speed, good movement skills, really explosive into his routes and is able to get on top of press coverage as reflected by his testing numbers. Had under a 5% drop rate the last 2 years. Somebody that is really going to excel as a downfield threat, really tough guy. That being said, wasn't productive in college, not good after the catch, not the ball winner you'd maybe like to see at his size, but I think that's something that can be coached up a little bit. There's a reason he made this roster over Tim Patrick, part of it being that Tim Patrick is never healthy, but on top of that, he can do pretty much everything Tim Patrick was supposed to do for you. So I think this is an awesome pick. I gave this an A+ simply because of that. Initially, this pick would have been more of an A, because I pretty much would have just said, this is Tim Patrick for when Tim Patrick gets hurt. And now that Tim Patrick's gone, it's like you cut out the middleman. He's just Tim Patrick now. And that's great. You love to see Denver have another guy like that. And then finally, their last pick, Nick Gruglio, I believe is how you pronounce that. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't watched this guy play football outside of watching Spencer Rattler. Maybe I saw him in passing watching a defensive lineman, but I didn't scout this guy. I'm not going to sit here and bullshit you and act like I know what I'm talking about. He made the practice squad. That's cool. End of the day, either way, it wasn't going to impact their grade too positively or negatively. But all that being said, I'm going to give Denver an A here. I thought they did a very nice job. Bo Nix looks like he's going to be the franchise quarterback. Looked good in the preseason. I liked him well enough coming out of Oregon. Wasn't my favorite quarterback, but, he was my QB3 for a reason. There's something there. I think he's a guy you can win with. Love the Jonah Ellis pick. Love the Audric Estime pick. Love the Devon Vele pick. And then Troy Franklin, I understand. Really solid pick. And Chris Abrams-Draine, even if he wasn't my favorite corner, just like Franklin wasn't my favorite receiver, I see the vision, so I can't complain too much there. And then our boy Nick down there in the 7th round, hopefully he develops like a freaking superstar on the practice squad and turns into something for him, because Denver needs the help. Again, not to say that this is a team that's desperate. It's just when you got the Chiefs and the Chargers starting to be on the up and up again, and the Raiders maybe getting in position to get a quarterback next year. I know we say that every year for the Raiders, but maybe this is finally the year, among other, threats in the AFC. Denver needs all the help they can get. This could be a team that Bo Nix plays really well, ends up sneaking into the playoffs. Don't know how likely that's going to be, but we will have to wait and see. Crazier things have happened, and I think there's a world where that definitely can happen for Denver this year.
Had a chance on the throwback. This was an ill-advised throw. What an unbelievable catch by Cole Kmet. And he cups it too. No movement when he hits the ground, tucked up against his shoulder. Wow. Using that